Hi everyone. Let's talk about the social analysis segment and the summary segment real quick in this video. So the social analysis segment is typically what most people would want to know about when they think about social policy, right? So as we've discussed this semester, social policy is intended to address social problems. And so what we want to know is, have those social problems been addressed or solved or taken care of or ameliorated or reduced as a result of the policy? Um, Policies also rarely sort of fully solve problems. So we want to know, in what ways did the policy fail, or in what ways did it fall short? We can go a little bit deeper though, and let me just back up here for a second. So I've got this is just sort of a couple of introductory thoughts. In the next slide, I've got some more specific questions for you, and then, like I said here, we'll talk at the end just about the analysis summary segment here too. So as I was saying, I mean, what most people want to know in a social analysis is, was the policy effective? Did it do what it was supposed to do? Policies are rarely sort of fully successful, so we typically have to ask, in what ways did the policy fail or fall short? That's typically the language that we use. And then we want to know if this change is progress or an improvement. You know, did it leave us better than it did sort of before the policy? In other words, did it move us towards sort of a place of justice and equity? And what did all this cost? And we think typically in terms of both money and in terms of our values and freedoms that we've had to give up or embrace. So here's a few specific questions to think about. So what social indicators changed? How did they change? Did they increase? Did they decrease? Did they change as a result of the policy, or was it something else? This is probably the sort of heart of this section, the sort of meat and potatoes. And you probably can find quite a bit of information on what changed as a result of the policy that you're studying. So the second question to ask is, are these changes consistent with what the goals of the policy were? And then the third question is, are there goals that weren't met? So are there things the policy was supposed to do that it didn't do? There's also a thing called unintended consequences, and that's sort of what I mean by this. I guess it's the fourth bullet point here. Did anything change that wasn't supposed to? Were there unintended consequences? And then again, what did all this cost? Some policies have sort of a year-by-year cost, or a cost over the course of a decade or something like that. And so you can probably pretty easily find some economic cost information. But again, you're also thinking sort of in terms of social values. And I've got a slide coming up here on that in a second. So remember that throughout sort of the course of the semester, one of the themes, or one of the things we've sort of always returned to, have been manifest and latent goals. Those manifest goals are sort of stated, measurable goals. So we want to decrease the incidence of disease. We want to increase access to healthcare. We want to increase access to education, something like that. And we often can sort of have an objective assessment of whether or not manifest goals were met. So maybe a manifest goal is to increase access to healthcare for 50 million people. Um, and maybe a particular policy succeeded in increasing access for 30 million people. So it was successful, but only successful to an extent. It didn't do everything it set out to do. Latent goals, on the other hand, are sometimes unstated, but often have to do with values. So if you remember way back in the beginning of the semester, which I suppose feels like years ago, um, I think way back to the beginning of the semester, one of the examples we gave it had to do with gun control legislation. Most people are people who oppose gun control legislation often cite a social value. It would interfere with our Second Amendment rights, which have to do with the ability to protect ourselves from the tyranny of government, things like that. And so they oppose gun control because it infringes on a right. And so that's a really hard thing to sort of evaluate objectively, like it would be in a manifest goal. That's something that's sort of it's often evaluated, qualitatively. There's not sort of hard evidence that our values have been kind of infringed on. So as I said here, I had a slide coming up on social values, and I've listed the social values that are on pages 83 to 89 in the Popple and Leninger book. They've got a pretty good description of what each of these values are. And I should say, by the way, that this is only a selection of social values. There certainly are others, and certainly you should feel free to sort of comment on the social values that you think are in the policy that you're studying. So remember, a policy reflects our social values, or at the very least, they reflect the values of the party that supported and advanced the legislation. Our social values say something about what society should look like, even if it's this kind of idealized version. So one of the things that your social analysis segment should do is comment on to what extent a social value was advanced, if that was the goal, or um, or uh, 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 reined in, if that was sort of a goal of one of the social policies, or if that was a goal of your particular social policy. So in addition to sort of these objective indicators, you're also thinking about sort of these values, these non-objective, sort of subjective social values as part of your analysis as well. So the last segment due that last week of the semester is the summary segment. And what I'm looking for really are what I've listed in these couple of bullet points here. What are the important points from each of the previous segments? So the delineation segment, the historical segment, and the social analysis segment, and then a few words about to what extent the policy has achieved its goals. If it has, that's great. Say why it has. If it has not achieved its goals, say what's gotten in the way. And oftentimes, policies don't achieve goals because they're not funded, they're challenged in court, so they're never implemented fully. They're hamstrung, so to speak, by legislators. And then a few words on what revisions to the policy, what revisions should be made to the policy, and what else the policy needs to be successful. It could be more money, could be more public support, could be renewal, could be revision. You have some expertise in this particular policy now, and you should feel free to make some recommendations about what would make that policy more effective. A few words on human rights. So comment on what the policy does for human rights. Does it advance them or not? Does it frankly interfere with them? Now, human rights have been something that's only very recently been sort of part of the national conversation in the U.S. So if you have sources that are sort of, more than a few years old, there's a really good chance they're not going to mention human rights. So if that's the case, you should make some interpretations based on your expertise with that particular policy. There might be certain rights that a policy privileges or prioritizes, and certain rights that it doesn't pay attention to. You might think that maybe some human rights need to be paid attention to by that particular policy, and in that case, you should mention that. Lastly, one of the things that we've been studying here has really been a social problem, and a policy is simply a response to a social problem or a particular set of social problems. So a few thoughts on what else could or should be done to solve the social problem. Now, if your policy has completely solved a social problem, that's great. Doesn't need to do anything else. That's perfectly fine, but that rarely happens. So you can conclude your paper with what else you think should be done with solving or what else should be done to solve that particular social problem. So that's everything. Remember, I'm always happy to read drafts if you want. I'm happy to answer any questions. Feel free to get in touch. So hope this video finds you all well. Thanks for watching.